don't listen, do you? My name is Matthew Kroll.
And all I have is negative thoughts. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Joker.
Joker. I'm surprised you didn't read your opening in your Mark Hamill voice. You do a pretty mean Mark Hamill.
Oh, if I just was trying to do the...
Let's take it again. Come on. Give it to me.
What is up, Internet? You don't listen, do you? That's a little... It's all right.
Yeah, I'm shaking in my boots, and it's like the Mark Hamill was here.
My apologies, dearest listeners. My voice is not everything that it should be. I've been spending some time at Comic-Con. I've been spending some time at a Ren Fair, and there's been a lot of yelling and cheering and whooping throughout all those things. So if I sound a little less Hamily than usual, I apologize.
Less Hamily. I think that's a good way of describing a hoarse voice.
Hey, Shahir.
What's up?
Welcome back.
Thanks, buddy.
We missed you on Ad Astra.
Yes, I still, I've been dying to see the film so I could listen to the podcast just to see if you guys throw shade at me during the episode.
Here's the thing. Didn't throw shade.
Yeah.
But I have some questions about where you were.
Yes.
I mentioned it on the podcast. I didn't know this, but you and Will Smith are now best friends?
Total besties. We go back, way back. Yes, I got to hang out with Will Smith for a half hour.
Cool.
And I met him backstage as well. I went to Budapest for the premiere concert to celebrate Will Smith's birthday.
Nice.
That's a very strange thing. But Gemini Man is coming out, the new Ang Lee movie, which hopefully we'll review, but only if we get to see it at 120 frames per second. We were there. I got a last minute call to say, hey, do you want to come direct this little thing with Will Smith? And I was like, well, let me check my schedule. Flip. Yeah, no, I'm good. Of all the things I've directed in my life, this is the funny thing. This is the one my mother cared about the most.
That's the best.
It's just like I've done some fairly decent sized things, and this was by all accounts a fairly small sized project. But it was with Will Smith.
It was a live event performance.
It was a live event performance, which I was like producing some background assets for.
Sure.
And then the next day I was directing an interview with him.
Yeah.
And this is the one my mother cared about the most.
That's
my whole family, cared about the most. And so normally on shoots like this, I don't try to get a selfie or anything with the talent because you don't want to be rude.
Of course
you're there to do a job.
Yeah.
But this was one where I was like, I grew up watching this dude. He's his my parents are all. If I can get this selfie, my parents will know that I actually do what I say I do.
Look at me, Mom.
Look at me, Mom.
Okay.
I made it. But yeah, no. So look, I think you know what's funny as well. And this has happened a couple of times on the podcast, but I went back and I listened to our review of Suicide Squad because I was like, what did I say about Will Smith when we've talked about him on the podcast? And what I said was very true of what it was like meeting him, which is I think what I said in that episode was like, it's a shame to me that Will Smith isn't the biggest goddamn movie star on the planet.
Yes. Because
he's such a movie star.
Yeah.
And you know what? The only thing I think I might retract is that he might be one of the biggest goddamn movie stars on the planet.
He is.
His hit rate with blockbuster movies isn't as high as someone like Tom Cruise or something like that.
But he's still got the name recognition where Will Smith, weirdly, Will Smith and Tom Cruise probably have the same name recognition at this point.
Yeah, like your mom would know. My mom knows who Will Smith is.
And I will say Suicide Squad, I don't remember even what I said about it in the thing about Will Smith in particular, but he's probably one of the best parts of that movie. I mean, he's trying the best he can. Same with Margot Robbie, in my opinion. Trying real hard.
I don't think he's never phoned it in.
Yeah,
never ever phoned it in. And then when I got to talk to him, here's a quick summary of that, which is that he is disarmingly nice. Like it's completely disarming because here's this guy who basically the entire city of Budapest turned out to celebrate his birthday, who did songs from like 30 years ago that everyone knows the words to.
Yeah.
Who is like this huge internationally recognized person, and he comes into this interview and he treats it like we're doing him the favor. And you know, like, it's really disarming because we've been prepping all day to make sure we don't waste his time.
Yeah.
And he comes in and he wants to, and he shakes hands with everybody on the set and the crew. He signs autographs for everyone. He talks to everyone. He and I get to talking about well, the reason I was there was to like direct an interview about his career on MTV,
right,
and like where he started out with. And somehow the conversation got to where I came from, which was Fiji, and we were talking a little bit about how, you know, when the Fresh Prince was on, we would have to like, you know, there was a tape that came in from New Zealand, and we would have to like, the tape would get distributed, and we all watched that, you know, and it's all true. You know, I grew up watching the Fresh Prince, and he was like interested in that. You know, he was like willing to talk about it. We talked about hip hop. He is really nice. It's nice. Like, it's disarming, and it's because you're like, this man has no reason to be nice.
I mean, or every reason to be nice if you really think about it. I mean, like that's a good. It's good to hear that. I think.
It's also the other thing. Just the one last thing was that he came in at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so he'd been doing like press stuff all day, and it honestly felt like we were the first thing he was doing.
He felt fresh.
He felt like it was the first.
Almost as if he was a fresh prince.
You know, my buddy Nigel was telling me you should tell him a joke to break the ice, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I did Google a Fresh Prince joke, which I did not tell him.
I was going to say, don't do that.
But here's one for you.
Okay.
How do you find Will Smith in the snow?
I don't know.
You look for the Fresh Prince.
Oh, okay. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, Shahir, you and I remember Budapest very differently.
Have you and I been to Budapest?
No, that was a Marvel quote.
Oh.
That was Hawkeye and Black Widow.
Deep cut, bro. Deep cut.
But, well, look, I'm very happy that you got to meet Will Smith, and I think it was, you know, I having seen Ad Astra, without any spoilers, I will say you made the right choice.
I really want to see Ad Astra. I was like, there was a night in Budapest where I was like, where's the local movie theater? Should I go and try and see Ad Astra? I didn't quite make it because I had a lot of work on, but I still want to see it. Still want to see. You know, it's funny when you do the podcast. If a movie kind of moves past you quickly, it's hard to catch back up with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very excited that you had Red and
Red, Jamie, and Anastasia
on. I think that'll be an excellent review. I haven't listened to it because I haven't seen the movie, and I want to see the movie.
Listen, you were off hanging with Will Smith. Okay. What was I doing this week? Nothing working. So you win.
So before we get started, one thing I want to point out is that we're going to have a special bonus piece of content at the end of this episode. So please stick around for the end of this episode with our friend Annie Gillies, who went along to the Toronto International Film Festival to watch a bunch of films and review them for us in a little, like 1 minute quick hot takes. You're going to hear reviews of Uncut Gems, the new Safdie Brothers film, The Laundromat from Steven Soderbergh, Judy, the Renee Zellweger vehicle, Motherless Brooklyn, Waves, Honey Boy, Lucy in the Sky. So please stick around for that. I'm very excited that we have a new unpaid intern.
Do it. No, so this week's episode, Jahir, I'm very glad you're back. We're gonna tackle what apparently everyone else on the GD internet has tackled: the clown prince of crime himself, Joker.
This is a movie, oddly, you weren't excited for?
No, not really. So here's the deal. I saw the first trailer, and I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah. And then the second, I don't know, this might be a thing with me. It probably is. But the second that, like the way, at the film, which film festival was it?
It won Venice.
Yeah. So after that happened, and then people were treating it like it was certain reviewers or certain people that saw it were treating it like it was the next evolution in cinema, just like very like cracking open thesauruses to the point of like just tons of flowery language to describe a film always sets me off.
Okay. Is it the language or the film?
The language of the reviews. I mean, because the more I feel as though a review is trying to convince me, and maybe a film like this does need to convince people before it could actually roll out into the public, and we'll talk about the discourse. But it just felt like the reviews themselves were like trying too hard to justify something about it. I couldn't place it, and I by that point I was like, well, I mean, I'm gonna see this, but it's not something I'm excited for. Like, I almost had a negative effect to the positive reviews, if that makes sense.
Okay. We should unpack that at some point.
Sure. Yeah. But and then I saw the second trailer, which looked to be more of what I feared it was, which was just sort of like a very well shot movie with what I hoped didn't happen was like if it had really nothing to say. But like I don't know, I don't think I'm biased against DC at all at this point. Like it's not like we're in the Snyderverse anymore. This is a different beast altogether. So it's like it's definitely not that.
Yeah.
I just for whatever reason it was not something I was excited about. And then with the again the discourse going on, it even got me less and less excited to talk about it because I both sides are dumb.
Okay. What are the both sides?
I mean, the both sides. So the two sides, at least as sort of I see it, is you have one side where basically saying the things we've talked about before. We were talking about like the movie getting pulled from like with The Hunt. You bring up a bunch, but like that this film will incite violence, and we should not have this film out because it will incite violence in the current day and age, 2019 culture, and blah 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 blah. And the other side. Basically being like, shut up, snowflakes. No, it won't. This is a important, story for our age or whatever the hell. Like, I don't know. It just felt like no one was having a measured conversation about this film.
Yeah.
Which I'll get into sort of more thoughts about that near the end of the review.
Yeah.
But, it was one of the situations where, in my opinion, I was disappointed that I was right at the cause of what I think all this is from.
Okay, what's the cause?
I'm going to get to it later on.
Okay, all
so
right.
what about you? So you were excited, were not excited, didn't care?
I didn't watch the trailers, obviously, but I obviously knew that there was a film coming out by director Todd Phillips, who had directed the Hangover movies and Due Date. I liked the first Hangover movie.
Did he do all three?
Yeah, he did all three.
Ooh.
There's a second. There's a famous Jerry Seinfeld quote, which I think I brought up before, which he said something along the lines of, if The Hangover was just a standalone film, it might have gone down as one of the greatest comedies of the 21st century. But then they made two more. And so I was curious about that. Obviously, the Scorsese influence on the whole thing was kind of interesting to me. I was, like, okay, cool. Someone's, really pulling at this string. Let's see where that goes. And then the third thing was just this idea that, like they were going to do a standalone villain film that wasn't connected to a broader universe. And I was like, okay, I'm cool. I'm here for that. The images I saw of the film looked very powerfully different, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm here for all of this.
Yeah.
No expectations, but optimistic. So I guess my the discourse over the last week has been interesting to follow, and that's obviously something I do follow while not watching the trailers.
Right.
I think the notion that the film will incite violence, which I think is probably being pulled out of context from somewhere, is an interesting one. And I think, again, that episode that we've been long talking about violence in cinema is something that I think this film will play directly into. But I think I said to you at the time, and I tweeted about this recently, which was that I think the people who think that the film The Joker will incite violence then also have to kind of possibly agree with the idea that The Hunt should be pulled, because that is the argument that is made for The Hunt, and I think it's an incorrect argument on both sides.
Sure.
But I'm saying if you believe one thing, then you have to kind of acknowledge that is the fear that some people have, and it's in its best form,
or like a John Wick, or
or John Wick, or whatever. And I don't agree with that.
Todd Phillips actually said he brought up John Wick as a counter argument, which I think is a weak counter argument, and something that. But now, granted, what your argument is saying, I think, is correct. You do, if that is the consent of people that this movie will speak to a certain group of people that are violent and will go do violent acts. But like a lot of what and look, I get it to a point. Todd Phillips seems like he's literally having the entirety of, or like half of the angry internet coming at him.
Yeah.
And that's a shitbox place to be. Like, I couldn't imagine that level of pressure.
Yeah.
I've had Z-list I'm a Z-list known entity on the internet at this point, and I've had some backlash against stuff that we've done on, say, Extra Credits.
Right.
And even that small amount is it can be paralyzing a bit, and you don't quite know what to do. I can't imagine what Todd Phillips was sort of like when just the hate wave sort of came his way, and then there's like defenders, but then maybe the people that are defending he also probably doesn't agree with entirely. Like there's so many extremes in this point. And he said something. He tried to make the comparison to John Wick. He's like, why is Joker problematic and John Wick isn't? Now, there's a difference between the crux of that argument is problematic, right? Like, there are aspects of both that are problematic, but the aspects that people originally focused their stuff about Joker, basically an unabashed killer, rolling forward, like also a character we have 80 years history being a mass murderer. Not to say you can't reinvent it, but that's still going to leave cultural, psychic imprints on how you think about a character. John Wick, at least in the film, has a code that most people might consider moral outside of the murder. But if you're looking at sort of if you compare John Wick to the Joker, and you take away murder, okay, then you look at just motivations. I feel as though John Wick is more of a character that people could, I would say, relate to in a way more. But here's the thing. This is sort of the end of what I'm saying about this, and then we can go back and forth. When Todd Phillips brought up John Wick as the counter argument, he just randomly picked another violent film that is popular currently, but without any of the character subtext that I think is actually important. You could pick a ton of other characters or films to really nail this point home if that's the point you want to make. You could you want to stick comic book characters or comic book thing, be the Punisher. Like the Punisher is probably the closest thing that has been popular in an R-rating setting, in my opinion.
Right, the TV show, the
Netflix show, anything like just or like characters. Like there's other places to pull from, and again, I feel bad even criticizing that aspect of it, because when you are the target of something this grand, how can you? Yeah, I don't know.
I take a lot of I don't know if I agree with Todd Phillips on this point about John Wick, but I see his point, and I think his point is worth exploring. I think it's something I brought up on the John Wick episode as well. And I think what he's pointing to is the skewed sense of morality as divided by consequence of action, and what he's basically saying is, look, John Wick murders 300 people on screen in his film, yet my film, which also features murder, is being talked about being as dangerous, and I think what he's saying actually has some validity to it. I don't necessarily agree with his result, but I think it's worth discussing that topic. And I think for me the point of doing this film, The Joker, as a review will be an interesting exploration of the idea of what is morality in film.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at John Wick, the people he murders are basically the film sets it up, and I'm not even saying it does it in a totally effective way or in a way that makes it remotely important, but they're all everyone in John Wick is an assassin. It seems at this point,
right?
So there are people trying to kill John Wick, and so we instantly see John Wick, because we know his backstory, as the person that is being wronged, and therefore killing them does not have that sort of aspect of it. In Joker, it's the same in that regard to a point, because various people that the Joker kills, spoiler alert, Joker kills people throughout this movie, get to that point, but each time it happens, it slowly takes away from, I think, the people John Wick kills are portrayed to us as nameless, faceless baddies, which you can go into whether or not that is a good way to look at the loss of human life as well. But that's not what we're talking about here. Where the people that Joker kills are intimately connected to feelings that Joker is having about a lot of different, that Arthur Fleck is having about a lot of different either individuals or cultural touch points in his life, and you could argue both pro or against, like whether or not that has more validity than sort of nameless slaughter. But by the end of Joker, and again, I don't want to get into too many spoilers, it's very clear that these points that could have been made, and I think could have been made and argued well, I feel the movie misses.
That's. I think we're getting
Ahead of ourselves?
No, hung up on content as opposed to context, which is what I think Todd Phillips is talking about.
I think it's a little mix.
So like this is a very big topic, and I think we'll get into it.
Yeah, we can. Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of clamor in right away.
No, but I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think the question that it's kind of leading to is how do films depict morality in association in conversation with the audience.
Yeah,
and I think that's an interesting that is an interesting topic.
That might be. Well, I mean, we're going to touch on it a bunch here, but if we see if we get to the hour and some change part of this podcast, and we're like, oh shit, maybe we sort of do a two-parter about violence, and then we do a two-part or another one about morality in film, because that's fascinating too.
Yeah, I think it's I read a book this week about the topic to kind of prep for this episode, and I think it's a really fascinating topic.
Good. I just watched a lot of Batman the Animated Series, so I think we're going to really have a good cross section of information.
Well, before we do that, if you have thoughts about the Joker or any of the movies that we've reviewed, please write us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod, as did a couple of people this week. Zachary, who is starting the podcast The Screenwriter's Nightmare, wrote us in to this is going to sidetrack us away from the Joker for a second, but maybe into the same ballpark with Christopher Nolan. I don't know if you've seen this fight on Twitter, but there has been some debate over which of the two is a better movie, Interstellar or Inception. If you guys can spare half an hour, I'm going to spare us half a minute debate time. Which do you feel is the better movie? I personally like Inception more, but I could make an argument for Interstellar if needed. Mr. Kroll, Interstellar or Interception?
I like Interception, please.
Yeah, the I universe of Christopher Nolan.
Inception is a far more interesting film to me.
Okay.
And it's also one that, and again, I feel like I've watched. No, you know what? I only saw Interstellar once in the theater because Interstellar did not grab me. The visuals and some of the cool sort of science stuff was very interesting to me. But again, specifically, personally, the ending did not stick.
Okay.
For me, whereas Inception was just not only so fresh in ways that I feel like Interstellar was as well, but like it actually stuck its landing, and more importantly, even though like it did wrap up its story, but then it had a bit of a cliffhanger, not sort of with the top, right?
Okay.
But it's a baby cliffhanger. Like it's not plot dependent, but it's meaning of plot dependent. And when you can sort of nail that down too, that movie, I was like, oh yes, this is wonderful. And I rewatch Inception maybe once every few years because it's interesting and dream logic. Look, you know what I really want to talk about? We should do a podcast on. Sorry to derail the derail, but The Cell.
Oh, The Cell, the Tarsim film.
Yeah.
It's a film that, in my mind, doesn't work, but is one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. Yeah.
So it's funny. Whenever I talk about Inception, my brain instantly goes to The Cell.
Have you seen The Fall?
No.
You should watch The Fall. The Fall is the follow-up movie that Tarsim did to The Cell, and it's even more gorgeous, even more beautiful, even more radically dreamlike than The Cell is. The Cell feels like Seven pushed through the dream filter.
Yeah. It does.
The Fall is extraordinary.
Okay.
You should watch that. I think Jamie would love it as well.
Okay, nice. What about you? Which of these in movies?
I'm going to be not a contrarian on this, but I have my reasons. I actually am more of a fan of Interstellar than Inception.
Okay.
I think Interstellar to me is, I agree with you, the ending of the Interstellar kind of gets away from itself.
Yep.
And gets into sort of territory that doesn't really make logical sense anymore. But for me, Interstellar has more emotionally resonant moments, and I think the ambition of Interstellar in terms of what it's trying to say about humanity speaks more volumes to me than what Inception is doing. I do like Inception a lot.
Yeah.
Inception for me, the issue is that it doesn't, and this is a personal minor gripe, but it doesn't feel like dream logic as I understand it, and it's a film that one scene of dream logic really lands for me, and the others feel like movie logic.
You know what's so interesting? And I've actually talked about this before, and I don't know, maybe you do this too, but maybe not now that we're talking about it. I dream, in real life, I dream in a very cinematically narrative way. I'm not saying that my dreams make total cohesive sense,
right?
But my dreams that I remember are very structured in a way that a good story or movie or video game narrative would be put through. I can't remember the last time I had a dream that like, and then I was in a flower field, and then I was in a plane, and then Godzilla was talking to me about the 1976 Mets Worlds, whatever. Like that doesn't happen. Right. There's always a connective thread, even if it's like weird. Mm-hmm. And therefore I felt like Inception, like while it did feel like, oh, they're just going into different game or movie situations, but I was like, but this is kind of like how I dream. Okay. So
for me, I guess I dream the other way.
Okay.
Which is my dreams feel like very much like David Lynch movies.
Oh, okay.
It's that is a minor gripe because everyone has a different thing. My only issue is the spectacle of dreaming. Because I think what I want in that movie is like the spectacle of dreaming.
Yeah.
And I think the best one is the hallway sequence, and everything else, like the snow chase, which feels very much like On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah, the Bond film. It's all really fascinating, and I think Nolan does an incredible job of like pulling this whole thing together. Like, the movie itself is a heist in terms of film logic.
Yeah.
And he pulls it all together. So I'm not dissing on Inception by choosing Interstellar.
They're both good movies.
I just, Interstellar kind of speaks, there's an ambition to Interstellar that is trying to speak to the broader qualities of like where humanity should move,
sure,
or should be, and I that really resonates with me.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth, one for Interstellar, one for Inception.
So now, Zachary, you make the call. I guess you'd say, well, you just said you could make an argument for either, even though you thought Inception more. So now now you have to put your money where your mouth is and make a choice. Because if we know anything from the internet, you got to make decisions on arbitrary shit, or it means nothing.
Yeah, it's going to be, and it's all going to come back to haunt you at some point. It will be quoted out of context.
Right. Next up, we have Jonathan Blade says to us, what's the large-scale appeal of the Joker? I enjoy actors going all in, sure. He doesn't really do anything, though. The Joker has crazy and plot armor, which I love those 2 points, by the way. I think that's very poignant. But he's the ultimate just kill him guy, where you could. Indeed, just kill him. I blame Boland. Everyone wanted to be his Joker.
Yeah, so Boland was the artist behind The Killing Joke, the Alan Moore adaptation.
Joker, from a character perspective, across the 80-year span we've had so many different Jokers.
80 years? Is it really?
Roughly.
Yeah, is it because did he appear in Batman 1?
No. Maybe I don't know if it was Batman 1, but Batman was around before Batman 1. Batman was in Detective Comics 15, or that might have been Amazing Spider-Man.
1940, Batman #1.
Yeah, okay,
That's
so he's
Joker,
in yeah. So look, Joker is a great character, and he's meant a lot of different things across this giant breadth of time. Mm-hmm. There is a thing, if you look at stuff sort of in the logical sense of how a lot of the DC cinematic universe has been trying to sort of push us toward like a darker, realer world than, say, Marvel. I don't know if it's been successful, but that's been sort of the mantra. Mm-hmm. The thing with the Joker is the more realistic your world gets, and I think this is what Jonathan Blade is sort of getting to, the more you realize that his superpower is basically, as he put it, crazy and plot armor. Plot armor being basically these 2 things are things that protect characters and stories that when they should absolutely be killed or injured or taken off the board, and they're not because the plot deems it so, and their excuse sometimes can be that like, oh, but they're so nuts that they could just either figure out or luck their way through a situation. And that works very well in things like Batman the Animated Series, even Jack Nicholson's Joker, definitely Romero's Joker, hell, even Suicide Squad's Joker.
Yeah, I feel bad for Jared Leto because I didn't hate his, Suicide Squad has a lot of problems. Jared Leto's not one of them in my mind.
Jared, and I don't know what's true and what's not true about the way he conducted himself on set. I do know that your new best friend Will Smith plus Margot Robbie and a lot of other people don't want to work with Jared Leto anymore because he got like just oddly not fun creepy about the entire thing.
That might be so, but in terms of the movie itself,
if we're looking at the movie himself, that Joker's not terrible. It's a take on Joker.
It's a take. That's the thing.
I'll tell you, it's incredibly misused.
It's
in the film.
It's weird because I think I said this on that episode, which is that he should have been the main villain of that movie.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would say about that is it's like, how do you follow Heath Ledger? You're following one of the greatest performances in the history of acting as lauded by the Academy Awards.
Yeah.
And you're having to do the same character follow up. I was like, any take that is just functional is probably going to be okay. And he had a take, and I was like, cool.
I didn't like how extreme, how like young rapper-ish they made him look, but like that's just an aesthetics choice. Like that, you know,
it made sense to me.
I also don't particularly love that they painted over Romero's mustache, but like, you know, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's all like, what is that thing, the theremin theory, which is like, there's no rules to this that actually make sense. It's like, you know, it's a thing.
When you're portraying Joker,
yeah,
in a realistic setting, the more real you make the setting, the less believable Joker gets. And look, Dark Knight,
that could be said. That could be true for Batman himself.
Well, sure, but the thing is, to make Batman more realistic, you need to get a little more extreme, and then more away from the. That's kind of what I was going to get to. Everyone's like, "Oh, well, the reason Dark Knight's so good is because it's so realistic," and I mean that's not the only reason, but like that's not exactly true when you start dealing with like that motorcycle that pops out of a car and like. I don't know, like there's a lot of extreme, you know, millionaires driving tanks around a city, that sort of thing. So that Joker was not nearly even as, I would dare I say, sort of in a realistic world as this current film we're about to discuss, Joker. But I think one of the strengths of the Joker is or weaknesses in certain cases, is once you take him out of more fanciful, let's say, worlds or stories where he's being told, the less and less he makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I as far as the appeal of the Joker, Jonathan, I think the Joker is a totem, for lack of a better term. He is a thing that you can put a lot of different stuff into, and as a writer, I think it's an exciting opportunity to try to. He's basically, weirdly enough, a get out of jail free card for plot, and you could do something great with it, or you could do something cheap with it, and people have across the entirety of this character. But I think that's why everyone sort of gravitates to him. Is it's a juxtaposition of something that, even though at this day and age clowns are considered, I think, in American culture more creepy than funny. You can look at it. You can look at like all of the other stuff.
John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah. But that's like that original farce of like taking something that's supposed to be happy and childlike and turning it into something terrible. That's its own interesting psychology there. And then also he can be a incredibly well thought out, basically evil mastermind genius. He could just be so crazy that stuff kind of works. He could just be the antithesis of someone who believes in pure law and order and sort of the agent of chaos. Or he could literally be basically a glorified crime lord with a gimmick. Like there's so much you can do with the Joker, and I think that's why that's sort of the appeal. I don't know. What do you think, Shia?
My thing is, I think the reason, I think the Joker is an image. He came from was it Conrad Veidt who played him in The Man Who Laughs, so he has this sort of maniacal image, which is possibly why he why he appeared in Batman 1. I think the reason, and this is probably an evolution of the character over time, is that he is the perfect antithesis to Batman,
mm-hmm.
and that's why he's interesting. Is that Batman has this set of rules that he follows, which is that he can't kill people, and he doesn't use guns, and that is, and the Joker basically knows and understands that, and challenges not just the way in which Batman operates, but also philosophically, what does the Batman stand for? And I think Alan Moore's comic, The Killing Joke, really does play this out. Alan Moore is really good at figuring out what makes a person tick. And his idea with the Joker is that, it's everyone is one bad day away from complete chaos. And the Joker is, while his, he's one part gangster, so he's one part, just a crime lord, plotting the mechanics of taking down other people, getting money, murder, larceny, all that sort of stuff. But the more interesting part is the idea that what the Joker ultimately wants is to prove to people that anyone can be like him. Anyone can believe that they are. Anyone can be an agent of chaos, and I think the Joker's bigger point is that under the hood of Gotham City, under the hood of every human being, is the rug of sanity, the rug of human empathy with other people can entirely be pulled away. And I think that's what his idea. That's why he's interesting, because he basically he's unlike other characters, which is that you can't really ever beat the Joker because his worldview is so fixed, and you can't ever like prove him wrong. Like, you can just not do the thing that he wants, and that is the way you beat him. But you can't ever prove that no one is one bad day away from like completely flipping.
But you also can't prove that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, just because the Joker says, and I'm just saying he said that in a couple different things, but just because the Joker says that doesn't mean it's true, and just because you can't disprove it also doesn't mean that's not true.
What I mean is that you can't change the Joker's mind. Like, he believes his worldview as thoroughly as Batman believes his, and that's the thing. Like, you can't ever get to a point with the Joker where you change his mind. Well, like, you could certainly kill him, you could certainly imprison him, but none of that is going to change fundamentally how he sees the world. But then, and you're never going to like bring him to justice in that respect.
And the more and more you get into sort of more realistic stories with the Joker, the less realistic that is. Now, I'm not saying people can change their mind easily, but either something happens with certain, like, people don't change their mind about a ton of stuff, but also people are not invincible psychotic clowns in real life. Like, everyone is a mortal, at least until they figure that out. So, like, it's hard to sort of like, the more we put realistic situations and mindsets into fantastical characters, it's an interesting challenge in story writing, I think. The more stuff fades away and sort of falls apart by the wayside, even the things that make us love them. Batman, straight up, if you take 3 seconds to think about what Batman is, it's horrifying.
Right.
And I know comics have sort of tried to sort of go into this a little bit too, but it's basically a well-off dude who could be spending his money actually fixing the problems of his city because he apparently has the superpower of infinite wealth. Instead, he goes and beats the shit out of disenfranchised, granted, possibly evil people, or maybe just mentally unhealthy people, and throws them in a terrible asylum. Like, yeah, it's cool on an art direction standpoint, but like, if you start taking apart what Batman is, it's kind of horrible.
Yeah, of course. And I think, but in terms of the Blade's bigger question was like, what is the appeal of the Joker? And I think it's that to me anyway,
yeah,
it's the idea that he is an immovable force. Like, he is. You cannot change the Joker's. There's no point at which the Joker, in any scenario of being defeated, is going to suddenly believe that the world is, that humanity is good. He fundamentally believes that everyone is one bad day away from like absolute chaos, and that's what he wants to prove. And I think that I think that's actually really fascinating. I think the amazing thing about The Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan film, is that it manages to put that idea into action. Like, it's not just him talking about these things; it's actually him doing these things.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what makes that film so fascinating. And like, the challenge, the question of like why any actor would want to do the Joker is because like, it is that sort of challenge of playing someone with a completely warped worldview that is not not within the boundaries of society as we know it, and trying to make it make sense. And I think I think that's a interesting challenge, and I think that's why I'm interested in this character.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that's why Todd Phillips' film, not
Joker, just straight up Joker.
Just straight up Joker.
It's an art house film because of the text and the title in the beginning.
The big
just
bull?
the big sort of like not entirely clean font that pops up over the 1940s or whatever music that's playing. I don't know. It just felt very like, oh, all right.
Did you like? Do you think A Star Is Born is art house?
No, but
it has the same big font saying "A Star Is Born" as a character walks away.
Oh, that's true. Oh, but you know what though? It is harkening back a little bit. Maybe I'm sorry. Art house is the wrong
I think
terminology. So. It old timey.
Yeah,
I guess
it's a Saul Bass kind of influenced title style, which is big sans serif font, big yellow sans serif font saying, "Hey, this is the movie. Hey, you
look over here.
Yo, look at this. Look at this guy.
Well,
He's a real clown.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Real Joker kind of guy.
Blade for writing in again. Write in onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or tweet at us at onlymoviepod on Twitter if you want to talk more Joker or other things. But let's get into it finally.
Okay, tell us what it's about. What is the Joker?
Oh dear.
What is the IMDb?
Well,
say?
listen, this is one of the most comprehensive IMDb descriptions I think I've ever heard of any film whatsoever. So I just want everyone to strap in. If you haven't gotten a drink in a little bit, go get some water, maybe a snack or whatever, and it will still be going by the time you get back. A gritty character study of Arthur Fleck, a man disregarded by society.
Boom, done. Cool.
All right, we can go home.
Yeah.
I'm already home.
Yeah.
Yay.
I should go home.
You're like a block away.
Yeah, what am I doing here?
Yep.
Cool. So, Matt, we've already established you weren't that excited for this movie. Can you tell us about your screening? Because I think this is an interesting, like just to put it in context, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, did put out an alert that there was potential threats of violence at screenings of this movie this Friday. And I gotta say, I was uneasy going to the movie theater. I went. My screening was not the most comfortable because I went to the Nighthawk in Prospect Park.
Okay.
And and I would have thought the Nighthawk was kind of one of those theaters where people are silent and like sit and watch the movie. But this was not one of those screenings. This was like people were talking, people were on phones. One person, and this was the most distracting thing. One person I think had that thing where their phone flashes their light when they get a text message.
Ugh.
So during the movie, every 10 to 15 minutes, lights would be flashing in the bottom, like in the corner of my eye. And I was like, the warnings of like going to see this movie was like, it just played in the back of my head.
Yeah.
But we all have that fear, I think, particularly around this movie. And I think the idea of like, whether this film incites violence or not, is due to the fact that we all associate The Dark Knight with the Aurora shooting.
Of course.
But I read this fascinating thing, and someone will have to like verify this for me, and I'll double check it. But the idea was that the shooter from the Aurora shooting never said that he was there for the Joker, and it was only because he had purple hair. He never mentions anything about the Joker, and I think this was the broader thing, was that we have all got this false memory kind of associated that he did it because he wanted to be the Joker, but he never did, and he just kind of picked a movie at random. Like it could have been any movie.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, that's really fascinating that we've kind of falsely associated this moment of chaos with this character of chaos.
I mean, it's a correct connection, not based in fact. Like if it's a chaotic act that just so happened to coincide with a place that a chaotic story was being told by a chaotic character.
Much in the same way that the person who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan was obsessed with Taxi Driver. So Taxi Driver becomes this flashpoint for that kind of behavior. I think that's sort of an interesting way to start.
My screening was fine.
Okay.
I went.
People were respectful.
I mean, kind of. I went at 10 o'clock in the morning. There were some people chatting in the back, but that's a little bit par for the course. At the Astoria, at the UA Kaufman.
Yeah.
It was fine.
Yeah.
I think I could tell people didn't really connect with it at the end.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that that's not. I actually don't think that's going to be the majority of people that see this film. Mm-hmm. But I think a 10 a.m. screening on a Friday, the type of people that will go to a 10 a.m. screening on a Friday, I think that is not the type of crowd that this movie is built for.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah, man. Okay, so I want to talk about some stuff that I actually did really like about it.
Okay.
Sort of first. I thought that it was shot and cut together very, very well.
Yeah.
The way that the camera sort of moved or didn't, and also the way that the scenes are actually, the shots are placed with one another, really do help build this sort of uneasy world as the place is going. Also, of course, Joaquin Phoenix, I think, is fantastic in this. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a weird sort of thing, though. I think Joaquin Phoenix did a splendiferous job. I don't agree with, and this is just preference. I can't this shouldn't take away from anything like the craft that he did. I don't particularly agree with sort of the Joker that he portrayed, and the way that he portrayed it is not sort of my favorite of the 80 years, if I should say. And
okay.
To say it's just not one that I resonate with the least.
Mm-hmm.
but he himself, I mean, he went as we all expected him to, went all in, and he was Arthur Fleck. And you know, I will say, and we'll get to the very end when we get to the very end. For 90% of the movie, I was like, this is a complete character that maybe, while is not my favorite of the tellings of this cultural icon, it is entirely well thought out and well acted, and just a very intense and strong performance. I will also say that the what's it called? The art direction by Laura Ballinger and the set design by Chris Morin really gave you a it felt like a 80s city. It felt like 80s Gotham City.
Yeah, I was curious where they shot this, because it was like, oh man, if they shot this in New York, which I think they did,
yeah,
you really had to dress up
a lot
of New York to make it feel this way.
Now, granted, the while that look did, I think that look helped this movie immensely. There is a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a mental disconnect due to some plot machinations, and the time period that this is supposedly set in. Namely, at one point, the Robert De Niro's character, who plays the talk show host, gets a clip from a comedy club and plays it on his show, which is basically like a viral video, like someone shot it on a phone, but this entire movie takes place in the 80s. Like, there's things like that don't connect, and I feel like knock any, I don't know, tech person or consumer of a lot of media off of its feet a little bit. Again, not enough to derail what they're trying to do, but it broke me out of that all immersiveness that the set design and the art direction really, I think, worked very hard at conveying.
Right.
And then, just sort of without getting too much into it, other than that, I just think the movie has a lot of ideas about what it's trying to say and never logically lands a one.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get into that more. What about you? You other than you having Morse code being flashed at you every time a very popular person got a text message.
I know they were like red hot that night. They were like getting text messages every 10 minutes. I guess I felt very uncomfortable during the entire course of this movie. Not just because of the setting that I was in and where I was watching it in, but because the question I was asking myself the whole time was, is this movie a celebration of this character? And where I landed on the entire endeavor was, like you, I think Joaquin Phoenix is wonderful. They're not my favorite performance of his. I think he's melding a couple of different performances from both the master and her, and then kind of marrying them together in sort of interesting ways. And it just might be that like we've seen him kind of work in this in a similar space before, and but not for this character. So we'll take that for what it is. I think he, just in terms of performance level, he is one of the most unusual bodies I've ever seen on screen, and it really plays to good effect in this film. Like, he has this sort of slightly dysmorphic body, he lost a ton of weight to do this, but like his body, and it's weird to talk about a person like this, but I think his body is as much part of the performance in this film as anything else he's doing.
The camera work definitely points in that direction.
And it's similar to what he did in The Master, where, in The Master, he had this sort of incredible hunch that just sort of got more and more pronounced, where his body was arcing towards the ground in like strange angles.
Yeah.
And that thing, there's a shot right at the early start of this movie where you see the back, like his back for the first time.
When he's stretching the shoes?
Yeah, he's stretching the shoes out. And there's the way the film, the camera is set is that his arm is jutting out of the left side of his body, but it feels like it's at the wrong angle. Like, you're like, wait, his arm doesn't look like it's actually attached to his body.
It's like his shoulder's a little too low for where his shoulder blade should be.
Yeah. And I think that's like really carefully considered interplay between the camera and this performer, and I think it works really, really well. Especially, there's moments when he's dancing and you can't like take your eyes off like the way his body moves. Like it doesn't feel like it should do the things that it does. So I think that's like really, really, really powerful. And I think again, the challenge for any actor is doing this role after it's only been 8-9 years since the No, actually,
No, it's
sorry,
like 15 or something.
No, yeah, 12 years now because it was 2008. Is my math correct?
That's 9 years.
9 years. Yeah, sorry. What am I talking about? And I think the performance is, like for any actor having to do that. I think it's such a big challenge, like you're following one of the most, lauded performances in film history, and having to basically give a take on it when that performance is still fresh in our brains. And
It's 11 years. I'm so sorry.
11 years. Oh, so I was close. I was close. Yeah, my math is not my.
Mine wasn't either.
Yeah. We'll eventually get there on this topic of finite numbers. But so I think any actor who has to do that job, good for them. I haven't watched. Is it Gotham on ABC?
I've watched enough of it, but I haven't gotten to the point unless they went back and like there was someone they were sort of putting forward as the Joker, but then it turned out wasn't, but maybe could be now. I don't know. I hear that movie kind of that show went off the rails in a nice way. I don't know.
But if you're a white middle-aged actor having to play an iconic role, this is up there along with James Bond, unless the times change. And I think he does. It's a great fit of performance for this person. I think Phillips, who kind of imbues the film with this sort of Scorsese-esque aesthetic, does an admirable job of building a world out that feels that appropriately references the grime of New York City that we grow to know and understand. Of course, he's transplanting that idea onto Gotham now, but that's where his worldview is at. I think the movie underutilizes a lot of interesting performers like Zazie Beetz and Brian Tyree Hill.
Yep.
For lack, I guess just they're there in service of the script. But overall, one of the things I guess I was interested in this is that I feel like this movie is a big swing at an idea about where we can pitch comic book movies from this point forward. And whether it lands or not, I still admire the swing. I admire the sort of chutzpah to walk into a pitch meeting and say, I want to do a comic book villain movie which is not connected to any grander universe, although there is some of that in this movie. And is a character study in the banality, a character study in evil. And I think that's a big swing. It's a really big swing, and I think that's why people were fascinated to see what this movie was, you know? And I personally admire the swing. I don't think the film lands. My biggest problem is that the film is basically essentially toying with the idea of what is morality in film. Like what is morally acceptable for an audience to engage with, and while I think the film is very capable, and I think Todd Phillips is proving absolutely capable of rendering that world, I'm not 100% convinced that the film knows what to do with that idea and knows what the implications of that idea are. And so I thought a lot about films like American Psycho or Falling Down, or films where obviously films with the anti-hero, films with villains at the lead, films with morally compromised centers, and I think. Many other examples, particularly American Psycho and particularly Falling Down, understands that there is a morality to which the audience needs to view this character. And while we can engage in their villainousness and their murderousness and the compromise of their internal morality, the film needs to know what to do with it. Now, I think this leads into an interesting conversation about can a film be amoral? Can a film be, can a film kind of absolutely work against the fabric of society as we know and understand it?
When you say, can a film do that? I mean, the answer is yes, but you're saying, will an audience engage with the film?
Yeah, or how does an audience engage? How does an audience engage with a film that is amoral by the boundaries of what we understand as society? And I actually had to, at one point in my career, had to ask that question or try to answer that question with a film about Charles Manson. This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but hopefully it'll get me back there. But when I was teaching in film school, I lectured on film and censorship. I was invited by the chief censor of New Zealand to look at a film that they were trying to figure out how to place. And there was a film about Charles Manson, which essentially celebrated Charles Manson's life. It was basically from the point of view of Charles Manson. And looked at his deeds as kind of a sort of as ingenious and celebratory, and the film had no sort of moral position against that, which I think is something that the Joker as a film kind of gets into. And my position there was to kind of try to identify what the historical context for this film, this type of film was. And it was, we talked about exploitation films and midnight movies, and that was kind of where this film came from. You could argue The Greasy Strangler, which we reviewed a couple of weeks ago, kind of plays in the same ballpark. But the thing with The Greasy Strangler, the thing with American Psycho, the thing with Falling Down, the thing with any number of films, like Badlands that deal with amoral characters, is that they do understand, or they do play in a world where they either have a satirical bent, so that they know that they're playing in a sort of satire. They either have a transgressive quality to them, where kind of like Fight Club, which is where there's a sort of a punk rock sort of fuck it, this is the world and chaos, and I'm just going to do it kind of thing.
And there's also in Fight Club, there's also the antithesis of that in it as well.
There is, there is the antithesis of that in Fight Club, and I think it's whether this film kind of knows to have one of those ideas to push back against the amorality of the Joker, and I don't think upon first viewing the film knows or understands the implications of what it's doing. And it's not to say that the film isn't rendered beautifully, and it's not to say that the film doesn't, have some very big ideas on its mind. But I'm not entirely convinced that the film knows how to place the Joker within the context of the audience that's going to receive it.
Well, that's an interesting point. Like, I want to actually go back to the last sort of Todd Phillips thing that he sort of said about this movie when again, I feel like increasing pressure from a growing number of people on the internet when they're coming at you like that, whatever. This was in a Vanity Fair thing, but it was talking about why Todd Phillips, the director of The Hangover and
a film you did on this podcast, which I didn't do, was War Dogs, and
with Steve.
Yeah, you did with Steve, and it's and that's a movie about anti-corruption, and yeah. So it's not like his career hasn't been leaning in towards this direction.
No. But basically, there's a lot of, again, in the discourse, there's a lot of the stuff about how certain comics are feeling as though they can't do their comedy anymore because the world is just too sensitive. And basically, in a thing with Vanity Fair, it was sort of they clickbaited title it, Todd Phillips versus woke culture. But this is what Todd Phillips sort of said. He said, "Go try to be funny nowadays with this woke culture. There were articles written about why comedies don't work anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because all the fucking funny guys are like, fuck this shit because I don't want to offend you." He goes on to say, "It's hard to argue with 30 million people on Twitter. I agree. You just can't do it, right? So you go, I'm out. And you know what? With all my comedies, I think that what comedies in general have in common is that they're irreverent. So I go, how do I make something irreverent but fuck comedy? Oh, I know. Let's take a comic book movie universe and turn it on its head with this." And so that's where Joker really came from. Mm-hmm. Beyond the inciting violence, arguments and on both sides, whatever, I think this argument that a lot of, and I will even say, comedy directors, comedians from roughly, that were maybe on top about 10 years ago, that, you just can't be funny because everyone's so offended anymore. I think that's completely and utterly bullshit. I think it was much easier to get praise and laughs in a world that was not quite as aware of the way that some things could actually do mental and in some case physical damage to people. And I think that when you get down to it, what these people are actually complaining about is the fact that society, and sorry everybody, we live in one, so you kind of have to deal with that or move into the woods. The fact that their particular brand of what used to get them laughs is no longer in a lot of streams considered funny anymore.
Right.
Comedy does change. Even this movie talks about sort of the subjective nature. It doesn't really land with it, but it brings it up. The subjective nature about what societies think of things.
Right.
And truth be told, yeah, you know what? You can be highly offensive and still funny and not piss people off. But the problem is you have to counterbalance your offensiveness with being actually funny. You can't just say racial slurs into a podcast mic for 30 minutes and because your three buddies in the room are laughing, that's not you are not a comedic genius. Like there are a great example. I don't know if you watched this at all, Shahir, but Nikki Glazer just did the roast of Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
Did you see this clip at all?
I think I saw the yeah.
So that is my perfect example of comedy that is incredibly offensive if you just break down the words, but with the performance and how she's doing it and who she's doing it to, and knowing, reading the room basically. That is incredibly offensive material. That is never making the offensive parts of it, making the people that are victimized the butt of the joke, but using it as sort of like fuel for the rest of whatever the punchline is supposed to be. She's also punching up in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And like that's how you do that kind of comedy. And the problem with a lot of these people and I think Todd Phillips might fall into this, is that when they just think like, oh, well, we can't be funny anymore. It's like, no, what people consider funny is not the same anymore. And I'm not saying, of course, some people still do, but I'm saying if 30 million people are attacking you on Twitter, maybe a lot of people don't.
Right.
And so I think when thinking about stuff like this, and I don't even think, I think he is incorrect in the fact that like, woke culture has killed comedy. It's like, no, they've made it so you actually have to try harder. And to get that magical place of everyone finding a thing funny. It's not as easy anymore because you can no longer lean on scapegoats anymore. Now with swinging sort of back to Joker, I think even though I disagree with his motivation of getting to the point where he's at, I think, when he says, oh, okay, so how do I do something irreverent but still say fuck comedy, which I don't quite agree with that. But like, yeah, he's taking I would argue in most cases, the Joker is irreverent, even though it can deal with on specific things, a Killing Joke, etc., a couple episodes even of Batman the Animated Series. But like a character that in the 80-year span of them probably has more irreverent points to that character's lifespan than not. Yeah, you could totally try to do something like this.
And doesn't he do that? I mean,
he attempts it.
Yeah, but no, but he does do it, right? Like I'm not certain how you're connecting the criticism of his comment about you can't do irreverent comedy versus him making a Joker film.
He's trying to turn something that he would consider irreverent into something, I guess, dark instead of funny.
Read me the comment again. Like I'm getting lost on this.
He says sorry. So he goes. He goes, I'm out. And you know what? With all my comedies, I think what comedies in general have in common is that they're irreverent. So I go, how do I do something irreverent? But fuck comedy? Oh, I know. Let's take the comic book movie universe and turn it on its head with this.
So, but isn't what he's saying there is that he can't make a Hangover Part 4 or a Due Date Part 2?
Sure.
That's what he's saying.
That he thinks in this culture you can't. And yeah. I agree because this culture no longer considers that funny. And also, but this is the other thing too. This is a weird sort of sidetrack, and this might even get into when we swing back to Joker. Let's look at the Hangover series real quick. Hangover 1, I still think is very funny. Is it very of its time? And certain jokes you might cringe at a little bit if you are culturally aware of American society in 2019? Sure. Is it still a well-made, very funny film? Yes. You look at the evolution of Hangover 2 and 3, and they are... I would love to get into an argument about someone who tries to defend Hangover 3 as remotely as good or competent as Hangover 1.
Okay.
And it's not just because the cultural zeitgeist changed. It's because it's the same dumb jokes that we've heard already.
Right.
So there we go. Now, so to have someone be like, well, I'm going to take this one thing, Joker, and now turn it on its head. So, haha, now this is what I'm doing with this. But basically after the fact where they tried telling the same type of comedy 3 times in a row with the film franchise that got progressively worse, I just don't particularly buy the tie-in of like, oh, well, it's not that I'm not funny or that my jokes aren't funny. It's that you don't get it. So I'm going to take something that you get and turn it into something else that you won't get. And it's like, okay.
Right. I'm not...
I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I'm sorry if I'm not being entirely clear. The moral of my story is...
Yeah, okay.
I disagree very much with this idea that woke culture is ruining comedy.
Yeah.
And I think it's very weird that he tied that particular argument to why he made Joker the way he made Joker.
But I think... I'm not. I think what he was saying there is that I can't make comedies the way I want to make comedies anymore, so I'm going to go try doing something different.
He's going to go try to take another thing that people think is one thing and try to make it into another thing.
Right.
But I don't get those two comments. I think what you're not getting is exactly kind of what I'm not getting. They're disparate issues.
Right, yeah, they're entirely different.
So he's tying something like that back into making sort of a reasoning why he's doing this. I just didn't understand it. Maybe there's a longer conversation there to have. But the end of that too is with Joker, the attempt is made, as you put, the swing is taken.
Yeah, and it's a big swing.
But it's also a big miss.
Yeah, it is a big miss. The movie doesn't land for me, and it doesn't land for me because of a couple of things. One is the incongruity, I think, that you mentioned above of how the movie communicates broader ideas of, I guess, counterculture.
Yeah.
Like there's a sense that the Joker becomes a counterculture icon when people realize that he's murdered rich people. We're in spoilers now, obviously, but there's a murder on a train where the Joker kills 3 people.
Wall Street guys.
But there's a sort of disconnect. Like the Joker himself says at some point that I'm not a political figure, but there's a disconnect with how this moment becomes transgressive and iconic for this character, for the broader world around him. Now, I think Phillips does a really good job of building the idea that this world is corrupt and it's getting worse. There's this idea that there's a garbage strike and super rats, and Thomas Wayne is coming in as like a billionaire mayor who's going to save everybody and wants to do good by the world and thinks that people who think that the murder of these people are clowns. Ergo, the clowns become an icon. I like in my brain, that's not how counterculture seems to work. Like, I guess, one of the things that, I think about a little bit, and it may not be a good example of counterculture, but, for example, in the murder, when Trayvon Martin was murdered and the hoodie and the Skittles became iconic, it's not because it's because he was a disenfranchised person. And so the murder of these 3 people on a train with no context around it doesn't quite ring the same way to me to become like this rallying cry of people around it.
It's not built well in the film.
Yeah, it feels like there's a somewhat of a disconnect to it. And by the end of the film, when the world is kind of like falling apart on itself and everyone's wearing clown masks and that sort of thing, I'm like, wait, how did we get to this moment? Because the character himself, the thing that I think is interesting about the character itself, or the character study, is that it's about the internal struggle of the Joker. Yet somehow those internal struggles of the Joker become reflected on a broader scale around the world,
based on purely misinterpretation,
but based on not him actually engaging with the world. Like he doesn't even engage with the world in any sort of meaningful way.
And there's some interesting things that this film doesn't do them, but there's interesting sort of ways it could have taken this, right? For instance, like how do ideas, especially you could go back to backlashes on Twitter, how do statements or one tiny thing in the world echo insanely and twist the shooting at the Dark Knight? Like all of this stuff is very interesting, how one small thing can then completely reverberate and become a huge cultural touch point, again seemingly only really for a moment. That's where this movie falls apart too, because stuff like this doesn't stay in the cultural zeitgeist for long enough to become a full rallying cry and this sort of thing. But
it also feels like it happens on the fringes, and it would be interesting for the Joker then to cultivate on that, and he doesn't. And now look, Mickey and Mallory from Natural Born Killers has this kind of idea in it, the idea that like they become celebrities because of their murder spree, and but I think like the movie doesn't have anything to say about the way in which these ideas reverberate, other than just to use those ideas, and it's like I think the where the movie starts falling down for me, is this idea that the Joker reverberates through society in a bigger way without having him
having to do anything,
or engaging with that. And I was like, that's sort of a disconnect with me, because essentially then there's a thing that happens, which is in part with the reaction that my audience had to the film, which I was like curious about, and in part because of the way the film utilizes music, for example, which is that the movie, essentially the way I read it, kind of starts to celebrate the Joker's the Joker sort of becoming iconic.
Yeah.
And like slowly, like when he walks down the stairs and starts dancing for the first time, it's played to music which is not played in a sort of diegetic or satirical way. Like you think about the way in which American Psycho uses Huey Lewis in the News.
It becomes literally exactly the same way, though a little less sloppy, that Suicide Squad uses music. By the end of it, it does. It's we're watching a music video.
Yeah, a little, and I think the issue there is I'm not certain, and I'm not convinced that it knows what is happening when it does that.
It thinks it's cool looking.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sort of
It is cool looking, but there's no point. Like that's
no,
why
but it's also amoral to the audience.
Yeah.
Like
but I'm saying it doesn't. I think the film doesn't realize that it's amoral to the audience, or doesn't care because it looks cool.
Yeah, and I'm not in any way suggesting that the film is dangerous, but like which is the argument leveled against it. I don't buy that for a second, and I think it's a film to be engaged with, but unfortunately I'm not sure that the film knows what it's doing with these ideas.
I just wish it said something.
Yeah, and I think what it's saying ultimately about, I guess, look, here's the thing. The Joker, for whatever reason, in the last year since the announcement of this film to the release of this film, has become a touch point for the way in which we view society, and we all live in one. But I think the thing is I'm not sure the movie intended to be that. And if it did, it doesn't know how to engage in that conversation meaningfully.
It doesn't, I think. Could be a pro to art, or it could be a con, depending on what you want your art to be. It doesn't read the room. It doesn't realize the way. Todd Phillips and whoever else wanted to make this movie because they wanted to make this movie, and that's cool. And you should be able to, if you're in the place and you want to be able to do it and you have the means, like, yes, you should be able to make what art you want to make, as long as you're not actually hurting anybody. And this film did not actually hurt anybody. Yeah. But just because you can make whatever you want, I go back to my comedy thing. Just because you can tell any jokes you want, you are not entitled to a person's laughter, and you are not entitled to people liking or completely connecting with your work. And I do believe that the more you think about the room that you are projecting any art into, if you are looking for people to agree or admiration, or even a specific subset of people, you actually need to understand the, quote, again, society you're releasing a thing into. If that's what you're looking for. And if that's not what you're looking for, then you really can't be angry when other people get upset about the thing that you weren't pointing at them anyway.
So I want to steer this conversation away from the film a little bit, and more into like the way we read a film.
Let's do it.
And the book I read this week was called Film and Morality by Philip Gillette, which basically talks about how do we discuss, can films be moral, or what does morality mean for a film itself? And the quote I wanted to pull out here was this one. Telling a story provides the opportunity to make an imaginative leap into another person's mind through the medium of a character. But supposing that character is evil, a possible hypothesis that is developed that a developed moral sense is capable of withstanding such an insult. We recognize evil when we see it, and we use it to test we use it as a test of our moral system in the way that an infection primes the immune system. A lingering doubt is the effect of an evil film character on an evolving sense of moral sense if other social and cultural constraints are missing or inappropriate. Alternatively, and following Kramer's notion of now this is another philosopher they're referring to, Kramer's notion in writing of responses to A Clockwork Orange, the evil character may offer a form of aversion therapy. But how far does moral awareness have to be developed before this can happen? And basically what this quote is talking about is what happens when you are not entirely morally aware or have a moral framework that fits within a broader context of society. What happens when you're engaged with a film that speaks to an amoral center? If, for example, A Clockwork Orange is about, a group of young men who fight off, who engage in violence and
highly counterculture stuff.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And I think the issue here is, speaking to the point that you're making about whether whether you can make jokes that are transgressive. I think you can entirely make jokes that are transgressive. I think you can make movies that are entirely transgressive. I think, though, fundamentally, we as a society and a culture may not be able to collectively engage with a movie that is entirely amoral without either a sense of rejection or without a sense of coming to terms with art on its own terms.
I will say it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable.
It's highly improbable.
And this film did not do that.
Yeah, and the problem is the issue for me is that this is a big swing. This is a big blockbuster with a very well-known IP. And the thing that I was sort of worried about when I was watching it was people applauding when the Joker murdered people, and that happened in my screening.
Yeah.
And it's actually to the point about John Wick, I asked the same questions around John Wick. You know, like, again, I don't think John Wick shouldn't exist, and I don't think that but I think it's a broader conversation that we should be having. And I think what Todd Phillips wants to do, in reference to that quote, is to make something entirely transgressive. You know, entirely like flipping it on its head. This is the origin of evil, right? But I think what Todd Phillips may have either misread in the room or not considered is that in counterculture movies, in films that, you know, where the bad guy ultimately is the hero of the piece, in the films like Nightcrawler, for example, which we reviewed, in films like Falling Down, in films like American Psycho.
Maybe not the hero, the protagonist.
Yeah, the Wolf of Wall Street. And Scorsese is the master of this, is that there is something through the lens where we're watching an amoral character, and we have an understanding that the film is not endorsing that character, but is questioning whether we appeal. And I think what makes Scorsese so good at this is Scorsese turns that lens on how do we, the audience, read this character. So, you know, the final shot of The Wolf of Wall Street is Jordan Belfort, you know, selling the same crap that he's been selling to an audience, and they're lapping it up. And that's the final moment of the film, because then you realize that we have lapped it up throughout the entirety of that movie.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that this film has an argument to make in that. Now, does it have to make an argument in that? I'm not. Maybe not.
No, but but it also doesn't have to be effective. Like that's sort of the turning point on that.
Well, I guess my broader point there is, does a film have to have a moral center? You know, like can a film be entirely amoral?
It 100% can. It won't resonate with as many people. I mean, that's no matter whatever spectrum of morality you're talking about. This is a great sort of thing. Jamie said a quote the other day that I loved.
She seems to do that a lot for you.
Because it's just, she sort of thinks about things in ways that I don't, and I really appreciate it. We were talking about when we were younger, and just like the different sort of mindsets you get into about art or about how the world works or whatever. And I don't know about you, Shahir, but I went through a bit of a nihilist phase in my 20s.
Yeah.
Because oh man, the world's fucked and nothing matters and God isn't real. So fuck it. You know what? Doesn't matter. Blah, 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 blah. And then when you're in that sort of phase, I've found personally, you try to expunge that, and you want to spread this newfound wisdom that you've had. But there's a secret about nihilism. And Jamie said this, and I loved it so much. The big secret about nihilism is that it's boring.
Yeah, that is a very good point. It's the idea that even nihilism, fascism, they're also just inverted forms of order.
Yeah. So in that regard, you can make a film that has no moral center, that means and says nothing, but people aren't going to connect to it en masse.
Right.
Like, because at the end of the day, that is boring. And when we come to especially mass market films, people are going to feel entertained, whether that entertainment comes from a sense of joy or excitement or fear or questioning their own morality. It's real hard to question your morality if it's not talking in a moral subtext.
Right.
The thing that got me about this movie, especially at the very end, and now we're into super spoilers. One thing, nothing in this film surprised me whatsoever.
Right.
Every twist, Zazie Beetz' character being what she is, completely hamstrung. But it's funny. I knew exactly what was happening. Spoiler alert: the interactions she has with Arthur Fleck are not real and a figment of his imagination. The movie while putting something forward that makes no narrative sense, you're like, oh, it's a figment and they're going to deal with that later. But then when they deal with it, they just sort of like hand wave it and don't actually deal with it. Then they're like, instead of like telling you why or how or what the mechanics of this was, it's just like, oh, he was imagining it, moving on. The thing about him possibly being Bruce Wayne's stepbrother, Thomas Wayne's son, there's a whole subplot about his mother and is she crazy and is she not crazy or whatever. And you actually don't really truly get a fully realized answer. You get like the society's answer to whether or not that is true, and you can take whatever you want from that, but rather than sort of lingering in that doubt, instead, oh no, you know where all the Joker's problems came from, and he's going to take out his anger now. He's going to redirect his newfound power and anger onto his very ill mother, who is mentally ill as well as he is, and now he's just going to murder her because all of his problems are from her now. So moving even past that, getting to the point at the end of the film where I was like, if this film does a goddamn monologue, it's going to undercut everything that this film has been trying to say. And at the end of it, it's on a talk show, and there is a monologue about society and how you just don't get it and how all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And there's the joke, the thing you think what the movie's trying to set up the Joker's going to do is kill himself on this stage. And I was like, the entire time I'm like, no, he's not. He's going to shoot the fucking host. And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And that, you're right about what you said before, Shahir, is like the entire rest of the movie world is moving on without Joker in an 80s world that wouldn't have the ability to even reverberate like this for a short period of time, let alone this cultural zeitgeist of whatever.
It predates like network news as a 24-hour thing.
Yeah. And the actual idea that a dive comedy club with a shitty comic would then eventually have some sort of VHS viral video that gets on the desk of a prominent night host, and then he wants to have that guy on. Like, there's a lot of plot ease, a plot grease, if you will, in this film. For a film that's trying to paint something in a realistic setting, and I'll actually even say that this film is by far not realistic. It's just gritty.
You know what I think is would be interesting. The issue here is that you're not certain why it's set in 1981 because of these machinations. And I think the more transgressive act would be to set it today.
Yeah.
You know, the more transgressive, and I think a lot of what this film is trying to say is basically about the way in which we, like ideas reverberate. And I think that would play better today than it would in 1981.
But you know why it's set in the 80s, right?
Yeah, hit me.
It is set in the 80s. This isn't the Todd Phillips problem. I bet you he probably maybe even wanted to set it in a just sort of gritty 2019 shitty city. But for all this talk of like wanting to make a movie that's separate, not connected, and all this stuff, there's a lot of Batman lore here, and we can't have the possibility if this movie hits. Warner Brothers, if they're going to really double down and say, nope, this is a side thing, they can't go back and have a new Batman in current day if this isn't set in an earlier time period, because in this movie Bruce Wayne is a child. Like, there's a lot of connective tissue gymnastics here for a film that was very ardent about not being a connected piece to a cinematic universe. So they wanted to kind of have their, and I don't think Todd Phillips did this. This is something I'm not putting on him. This is a total, what it feels like to me, a studio move. They're keeping the bat door open, just in case that this can be the way that they bring the DC universe back into a connected fold a la Marvel.
You know what is interesting? The conversations I had after the film.
I didn't have any until now, so I'm very happy we're doing this. It's been sitting with me for a while, so if I sound like an impetulant child, I'm sorry.
The one thing we all kind of talked about was that we went into the movie kind of excited by the idea that this was a standalone film. The film that I kind of thought about a lot was Logan. Like Logan is a really great example of basically taking a character, putting it in a standalone film, and making it not feel entirely connected to everything else.
Yeah.
It does its own thing. And then the thing we all walked out of saying was that the most ineffective stuff in this movie was the connection to Thomas Wayne. Like even when there's talking about Thomas Wayne and Batman and that sort of thing, you're going, this is a really intimate character study of this one little guy, and I'm really interested in what this one little guy has to do.
And we still have Crime Alley. We still have fucking Crime Alley.
When it replays Crime Alley, I'm like, But then the thing I walked out of going was like, look, if this movie, the thing is, I don't think the movie lands on its own terms. Like, it doesn't land in terms of being an amoral character study that like has some point of view on the world that is warped and twisted, and has something weird to say as a reflection, as a warped mirror on the way we live our lives. Yada yada yada. But I was like, but if this was like a half-hour short that connected to whatever they're going to do with the Batman, I was like, I would forgive so much of what this movie is doing, and I would be like on board with the transgressive quality. Like, you think about those shorts that came with the Matrix.
Yeah,
if this was that, I think I would I would think this would be one of the most amazing pieces of media to accompany the Gotham lore. And I was like, it's really strange because what I want is the thing that I would have been okay with if this film was that. It's really, I'm sort of in a weird place with that. It was just a strange feeling where I was like, I don't think that stuff worked, but if it was connected, then maybe I would forgive it.
Yeah, I mean, or if it admitted its connection, I don't know, like, because they leave it open, and that's the weirdest part of it.
If it's not connected to the Batman universe, there's no reason to do any of this stuff with Thomas. I mean, like the Thomas Wayne as dad kind of thing, I think is actually kind of interesting.
Sure,
and it's
but it feels also completely separate from the rest of the film.
Well, it's the crime alley thing that feels disconnected. Like if that was the only scene, and and it was just the suggestion, and I really did like the idea that Arthur Fleck walks around thinking that Thomas Wayne is his dad, and then realizing that that's completely not true,
or it is, or the society has lied, but then it never deals with it beyond that.
I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that there's no lore in this that's etched in stone in the Joker universe. So I think like the idea that you can kind of like play with it is fun. Christopher Nolan's idea of like it could be one of 1,000 stories, and the Joker is never telling the truth.
That's more interesting.
That's fascinating, and that's so powerful because it's basically taking the idea of the Joker and putting it into action.
Yeah, the thing you bring up with Logan is interesting too. The reason why I think Logan works as a standalone work is because it comes at the end of a timeline, and therefore you can kind of ignore. I mean, it's the end. It's the end of this character, and therefore you could have light references without it feeling like it's going to be a piece of connective tissue, because the rest of the movies work without Logan.
Yeah.
And Logan could work without the rest of them, but only because it's the end of the story. Whereas this is the beginning of a story. And if you're going to connect this to anything, that means that then more story will have to happen. I guess my final thoughts on Joker is I think Shihir, you and I, when we were talking about the discourse going on about whether this film is dangerous or not or something like that, I believe I used the word, I'm like, I haven't seen the film at this point, but I was like, I just don't think the film's going to be necessary. And we got into a discussion about what is necessary in film and whatnot. And I would like to rescind that statement because I think that's definitely the wrong thing. Any art that wants to be made is either necessary or unnecessary. Like that's not something that should be levied against a work.
Right.
What I will say about this movie as sort of my final thought, a more apt word would be, I think this movie is ultimately inconsequential, but it's also the perfect sort of pinpoint about how we as a society deal with things that basically can run wild, at least for like 2 or 3 days or weeks, and then go away forever. Like, we are very in love with outrage, and we are very in love, and this isn't something that the movie is saying, this is just something that I think is true in society. So when Joker comes out, and I do think it's the perfect storm of like Todd Phillips, Joaquin Phoenix, whoever, not reading the room where this is coming out in, and then because there was not that care taken, everyone freaks out on either side, and both sides are not correct because there shouldn't be any fucking sides. Like, it's a movie that tried to take a big swing and didn't hit, and for the next 2 weeks or whatever. But I have a theory that the conversation around this film will, other than Joaquin Phoenix's performance for possibly award season, will fade. There's nothing here that I feel like even resonates. Even if you read the film wrong, it's impossible to read it wrong because I honestly don't think it's actually saying anything. I honestly think that once this becomes a less popular, this doesn't have the fuel to keep a discussion going, and therefore I do feel like even though there are good things about it, it's shot beautifully. I think the set direction is still the star of this movie next to Joaquin Phoenix. Ultimately, every other character doesn't particularly matter, and we get into a whole argument of like mental health issues and whatnot, which the Joker, you could go into that rabbit hole forever. It's just this movie, for me, and I do feel like in even the cultural zeitgeist beyond the outrage on both sides, is inconsequential.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and I think I agree with your point that it will fade out over time because it doesn't it dances around a hot button.
Yeah.
But it doesn't know how to push it.
Yeah.
It doesn't know how to push it in either like I think I would be here for a really transgressive punk rock movie about the Joker that says fuck it to the world and we are our own worst enemy kind of thing. You know, like and this is what we are.
If we took the discourse that's happening around the Joker and it was integrated into what the Joker was saying, because that's the thing.
Right.
And this movie doesn't do that.
Well, maybe it does, and maybe the fact that the movie is kind of creating this discourse is the reflection of it.
It's the connection. It's the connection to. It's like you said with the killings in the Dark Knight thing. It's not that the killer was dressed up as the Joker. It's that it just so happened to be the random movie was that. That's what we're experiencing with the discourse on Joker.
Right.
This is not a grand statement the film is making. This is a outrage that the film either unluckily or luckily stumbled into.
Yeah, and it has to do with who this IP is, but
Yeah.
like I'm on board for what this movie seems to have wanted to do, but I don't think it does it, and unfortunately that's a shame for me. Like I think Todd Phillips' transition from The Hangover through to War Dogs through to this, I think is like it's
Sure.
legit. I believe it. I buy it.
I think Todd Phillips is a good filmmaker. I don't agree on his I guess stances on a lot of opinions of things, but that doesn't really matter.
taking the internet with a grain of salt is kind of
Of course, clickbait is clickbait.
And like Scorsese this week is being dragged for.
Oh man, I wish we had time to talk about that. That's so silly.
But regardless, I don't think the film is dangerous. I think you should see it because it's an interesting nugget of an idea. I don't think it's successful in executing
Said
nugget of idea. So whatever you want, take the chicken nuggets with however you want to take them. With honey dipping sauce or with
Sweet and sour, baby.
What if you put like a hummus with a
just not Szechuan sauce.
Oh no,
I'm so fucking over. I love Rick and Morty, but goddamn Comic-Con, let's pull it together.
Let's get out of this Szechuan sauce. One thing. Okay, we're out of the review now.
Yeah.
All right. One thing I wanted to point out this week that.
Oh wait, we're not quite out yet.
Okay.
This has been the only podcast about the film Joker. Now we're out.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. Anything else we need to do? Like we need to put on a tie, take a sip of water.
Sure. All those things.
Sing a song.
Yeah.
No. Okay. Is the Joker played at the Toronto International Film Festival, and we were very lucky.
Yes.
To have a roving reporter. Which is something we can't afford.
No,
and
a free roaming reporter.
A free roaming reporter. Previous guest on the show, Annie Gillis, fantastic producer whom we both worked with, is an avid film lover, and said, mentioned in some conversation I was having with her that she was going to the Toronto International Film Festival, and she's such a great film lover that she's like, I'm just going to drop a hat and go to the film festival and see what I see. And so I was like, I jumped in with my cap in hand, was like, would you be interested in just giving us like a 1-minute review of every film you see?
Yeah.
And to my surprise,
yeah.
Not only did she do that, she did it with fantastic insights into the films that she saw. So I'm very excited. This is the first on the Only podcast about movies. If you would like to be a roving reporter for us, tell us which film festivals you're going to, and write us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at onlymoviepod.
Because we're not invited.
And we're not invited, and we don't have money to pay you. So work for free for us. Because isn't that how people work for the Joker? Are we the Joker now?
No, although I have been cackling quite a bit.
Yeah, you have been. So these, I want you to stick around. It's a 5-minute piece, but it's got a review of the new Safdie Brothers film, Uncut Gems, the new Soderbergh film, The Laundromat, the Rupert Gould film starring Renee Zellweger, Judy, Edward Norton's film, Motherless Brooklyn, the Trey Edward Schultz film, Waves, which I'm super excited for, Shia LaBeouf's film, Honey Boy, and Lucy in the Sky, the Natalie Portman space vehicle that is maybe maybe makes an interesting companion piece to Ad Astra. Please stick around to listen to all these reviews. You're going to get an insight into all the movies that are coming up probably in award season. Thank you so much to Annie Gillies for actually doing this
thanks,
for
Annie.
us and being our unpaid intern. Is that what she is now?
I guess. Well, before are we just going to play that at the very end? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
All right. Well, Shahir, when you're not calling Annie our unpaid intern, where can folks find you?
You can find me being very unethical with my labor practices at my website at www.shahirdaud.com. That's SHAHIRDAUD.com. Matt, if you ever do a redub of this film in the Hamill voice, where can people find you doing that?
I don't know. You can find me at my website, matghewcarol.com for my life and works. Also, Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also, please go check out the good works we are doing over at Extra Credits. I believe next week, I'm looking over at the schedule. Oh, man. I hope you guys like Star Trek, because we're going to look at the gaming implications of the Kobayashi Maru in a couple of days. And then also, we're going to be starting our Extra History series on Angkor Wat and the history behind there, which the art in that series by Nick DeWitt is some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever seen him. It's so good. So please go check that out. And now, I guess without further ado, here is our friend, Shahir,
unpaid intern.
Our friend.
Unpaid intern. This is funny because we usually work for her.
It is also true.
Yeah.
Annie Gillies, please take us away to some more reviews.
At the Toronto International Film Festival.
Bye.
Hey guys, sorry I can't be there to talk movies in Queens. I'm currently in Buffalo, a quick 2-hour drive from Toronto, where last week I attended TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival. I saw a bunch of really enjoyable films in 3 days, so here's my quick take on a few. First up was Uncut Gems, starring Adam Sandler, directed by the Safdie brothers. I don't think I've ever felt my heart racing in the beginning of a movie like I did with this. The first 10 minutes, it was nonstop. The music, the editing, the imagery, it's kind of hard to even explain. It was like this insane frenetic beginning, and it calmed down but still kept the excitement and kind of that energy throughout the entire film. It's about a high-end jeweler in a corrupt New York City diamond district. I enjoyed the movie and thought Adam Sandler was at his best. I also really felt for his character, Howard, even though he's kind of like a complete ass in the film. And NBA star Kevin Garnett also stars in it, and in my opinion, stole every scene he was in. Idina Menzel plays Adam Sandler's wife in the film, and I love everything about Idina always, so that made me happy too. Shahir's fave, Steven Soderbergh, brought his Netflix film The Laundromat to the fest, and unfortunately, it missed on a lot of levels for me. It tried breaking the fourth wall, Big Short style. Instead of focusing on the housing crisis and market collapse, it was focusing on the 2016 Panama Papers, and just felt flat. Meryl Streep was a shining light, as she always is, and there's this oh shit moment at the end that I'm not going to say, and I hope people don't know about going into the film, you know, if you want to check it out, but it was definitely like, oh, wow, okay. But otherwise, I wasn't feeling the movie at all. My favorite of the festival was Judy. I didn't know too much about Judy Garland besides The Wizard of Oz and some of her family ties going into the film, but I was really engaged and wanted to know more and more about her and her life as the film went on. That was mostly due to one of the best performances I've seen in a long time by its star, Renee Zellweger. Definitely believe the hype around her performance this Oscar season because she was truly astounding. I couldn't believe it was her. I kept on thinking it was really Judy. It was an amazing performance, and she sang everything herself. And she was actually in attendance the night I saw it and received an over 5-minute standing ovation afterwards, and that's not very typical at TIFF. Edward Norton stars in and wrote the screenplay for Motherless Brooklyn, a murder detective film set in the 50s. I enjoyed it, but it's not something I would tell people to run out and see. It's one of those films that is fun to watch, but then when the payoff comes, you're kind of like, I don't know, really? It just wasn't big enough. Also, Norton's character has a Tourette syndrome type tic, and it was hard for me to think of him as his character and not as Edward Norton playing a guy with a tic. It seemed like staggering a lot of the time, so that was tough to get through. Waves was my most anticipated film of the festival after hearing some great initial buzz. I didn't leave the screening thinking it was a masterpiece, but it definitely didn't disappoint either. It was moving and anger-inducing, heartbreaking, beautifully shot, and incredibly acted, especially from a really young cast. The film is basically 2 parts, one before a tragic event and one after an event, both focusing on different characters. I don't want to say too much more, but I definitely would recommend it. The biggest surprise for me was Shia LaBeouf's Honey Boy. It's based on his actual life, and it's actually written by Shia. The film mainly focuses on his tumultuous relationship with his father, starting when he was a young Disney star. Shia plays his dad in the film, with Noah Jupe playing the young Shia, and Lucas Hedges, who was also great in Waves, playing the current Shia. It was a really honest and just really, really well-written film, I thought. It put a lot of the crazy things Shia has done in his personal life in a better perspective for me. I guess I don't think he's that crazy anymore. And it's a film I definitely want to revisit. The last film I'm going to talk about is Lucy in the Sky, starring Natalie Portman. This film has been getting panned pretty hard, but I personally think unfairly panned. It's not a great movie, but it's not a horrible movie. And, I thought it was pretty entertaining and it kept my attention. It's loosely based on astronaut Lisa Nowak, who went a little cray-cray a few years ago, if you remember, after she went on her first space mission. So, I think it's worth checking out. It felt a little long, but I enjoyed it overall. Well, that's it for TIFF this year. Let me just say, overall, it was a lot better than the year I saw Mother, guys. But I don't know if you already heard, Tomb Raider 2 has been greenlit with my girl, Alicia Vikander. So plan to see me in your studio for a review when that's out. Thanks, guys.